Hi, Pencil. Welcome to our Fields in the Hierarchy podcast, where we discuss the experiences and challenges faced by working women today. Join us as we explore a range of topics from navigating career advancement to balancing work and personal life. So step into an episode of Fields in the Hierarchy, the place where we explore current challenges and opportunities and share extraordinary insights for ordinary women, one conversation at a time. What are we talking about today, SJ?
So I thought this was quite interesting. So I think we did something quite brave, I think, this week. So if the listeners are aware, one of the things we've been looking at is how do you grow, develop this, reach more people, continue to do what we say we're going to do, push our boundaries out and be brave. So we started a TikTok account this week.
Well,
Go us. The whole point of this podcast, ordinary women talking about leadership, women in the workplace. This is very much vulnerable and open. So well done, us. Bit of a plug. Please go and find us on our TikTok and social media and download on our YouTube. That's really important for us to be able to continue doing what we're doing. Two actual questions. The reason why I brought that in is because you shared a question on TikTok this week, which was something that we've kind of talked about before, but at the same time, we haven't really said to people about their experiences or challenges, things like that. Which I think is great. I don't know, I just felt would be really interesting to ask people. So the question I posed, and you'll see that on our social media, was what are the challenges in work and leadership for you or in your sector? And now have you got any stories that you're happy for us to talk about on the podcast? So that was the question.
Great question.
And so it's quite interesting because when we got them, and I think we shared it before we started recording, wasn't it? It was quite a broad range, but very common themes. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. Because there were a number of common themes, we've kind of boiled them down into three sort of areas. One of the things that stood out was that whilst we were talking about challenges, what we did see was that there were a lot of responses that caveated with the answer that I've got lots of examples of positive male role models, supporters, mentors, line managers who, I think there's a positive move towards an awareness that women still need to be lifted up and more consistently. In spite of that, we are still having the same challenges. So we boiled it down into three indicative questions.
Yeah, quite broad ranges. So I think from everything we talked, we're going to discuss three sectors that kind of speak about the same things but in different ways. And I think that's why it's interesting. So we're going to talk about one that was brought in around the public sector, one around the beauty sector, and the other one is about the manufacturing.
Yeah.
I have to say that very carefully. I'm going to start with the first one. So thank you to our listeners. It's really helpful for us to check out what other people's perspectives are, because then it actually helps that conversation and challenging our thinking. So I'll share the first story. I work in the beauty sector. I feel that there's a lot of discrimination due to the clients thinking actually women in this industry doesn't have any academic intelligence, which is far from the truth. It gets perceived that it's not a skilled trade, like, for example, plumbing or electricians, where it actually is seen as a good profession. It's actually quite the opposite. It's both physically and mentally exhausting and challenging. You have to play lots of roles, a role of a counsellor, a listener, an advocate, at the same time of taking your skills and making sure you have a high quality product, creating beauty for people. There's a lot in there, I think. I don't know what stands out for you, but I think that one of the stronger thing is the perception again. Someone's perception is that actually goes back to that bias and sexism a little bit. plumbers and electricians are seen as skilled, and yet the beauty sector is seen as not so.
When I read the answer, it gave me a moment's pause. One of the things that it made me think of was how easy it is to disregard the skill of somebody who is providing a service. It's easy to forget that there's a lot of artistry involved in that, because the person doing it to us, let's say as a hairdresser, and a lot of women often chat to their hairdresser or beautician at the time that the treatment is taking place. And you therefore potentially lose sight of the artistry and the skill behind what they're doing.
It's a skill in itself to make you feel comfortable that you're deluded that actually it's just that what they're doing is not, you're so interactive that you feel comfortable talking about all your problems that you probably wouldn't be sharing in that moment. But actually, that's a skill in itself to be able to make you feel comfortable, to enable you to share. But that is not as seen, because as the trade itself is seen as, well, you just talk to people all day potentially.
Yes, exactly.
Complexities is you're not just doing that. You're having to make sure that all the technical side of elements are correct, that you're doing things right, but you don't show that on the outside. You're interacting and making people feel easier. You've got to have a good personality to do that, and an amazing character about you to adapt quickly. Whereas the other traits that they discussed, which also seemed quite male dominated, not all, but are very much transactional. They come in, do their job, leave, and they might have a and you might have a tea. You're not going to share your life story with them. You're not going to have a long-term relationship with them like you would going to your beautician or etc. I think that's the main difference of comparison. And yet it did make me step back and go, oh, is that a bias, an unconscious bias that we have, that it's nice to have it exposed in a sense? I think, is that something that we have to check ourselves? That in a way is a good perspective to almost expose that this is what potentially could be going on.
Yeah, I was surprised by how the answer made me see those roles in a different light. It's almost like there's a transformational element to the beauty sector. It then creates inadvertently a place where it's easy to forget the level of skill and complexity to get from where you were when you walked into a salon, for example, and when you walk out. Now, that's testament to the level of skill.
It made me laugh, though, because not the actual story, but that perception when you're just talking about the transformation. I can't multitask. There's this whole thing, a myth around women multitasking. We can be dyslexic and be hypersensitive to things. As when we're even talking, when we're prepping or when we're thinking about podcasting, the amount of conversations that we're supposed to be multitasking different things, it's by, and yet we would see ourselves as quite professional women able to do our job.
Yeah.
This really highlighted, actually, I find it, hats off to people who can multitask and keep a conversation. I can't keep one conversation. I mean, it's a miracle that I'm doing this podcast the way that we are, because it keeps me focused. But you have to think, when they talk about multitask, it's not just I'm talking to you whilst I'm doing it. The live action. Stop doing it. They have to keep doing it, making sure it's doing it all right, having to keep, the individual happy and have those conversations, even if they're not really that interested. And a lot of conscious effort, which I think is the mental load that they're talking about, because you're not only processing what they're talking about in order to give a response, but you're also mentally trying to ensure that the timing's right, the right products are on there. You have to check whatever they're doing in the beauty sector. So there is that level that I completely put my hats off, because I know that I can't even multitask at the best of times. So let alone have to do that whilst focusing on task in hand, we need to kind of give credit to.
What was that? What was that line as well about they play a number of roles?
It's physically and mentally challenging as you play multiples of roles of counsellor, listener, multitasking to ensure high quality service.
that was really interesting as well, because you don't have the person always telling you what they're doing in the same way that you might in other professions. So if you're having a soothing massage, they might say, well, I'm putting the stones on you, or I'm just going to put some lotion on while I massage your back. So you don't get a running commentary of what they're doing. And I think the fact that that is one of the challenges around the perception of the level of skill that's involved in their role, but it's easy to underestimate the complexity of it.
So our challenge to our listeners is really is take that into account next time that you're in that sector of they interacting with you, but there's so much more, and appreciate that skill and that set of tasks as you would any other service industry sector, and like just have a second thought, I suppose, and challenge our own thinking.
Yeah.
Because we may all think something different. We may not realise that this is something that's a common challenge and we take it for granted. But I don't know, the last thought I had around this story was about in COVID. I don't know, no one wants to keep talking about it, but one of the big topics, especially at my work and things when we weren't able to see each other, is my hair, for example, my nails, my skin. So many people have rituals that they go and see somebody to make them feel better, or to, as part of their beauty routine, they have somebody else service that. And that was such a big topic, and it made people appreciate it even more so.
Yeah.
When we were unable to interact. And it just made me realign that again to say, I suppose my thinking is it obviously is something that is still a concern and an issue in 2025.
Yeah.
And regardless of the sex, it's very much around being aware that this is something that can be advised or seen without being spoken, and it's picked up on, and just appreciate that the beauty sector has so much more skills in order for us to feel so good about ourselves.
Yeah.
What was the one that you had? It was in the manufacturing sector, wasn't it?
Yeah, completely different sector. And this was about misogyny, how even as 2025 draws to a close, we don't see the Pirelli calendars in the factories so much, if at all. The banter is more informed and so is less likely to have a gender bias to it compared to 30, 40 years ago. But the contributor here felt that there is still a more subtle level of misogyny in her sector, but the manufacturing sector appears to still have a lot of misogyny in it. And that the contributor felt was that the misogyny tended to be a lot more subtle. So one of the examples cited was a discussion from a male colleague about dealing with other men and whether or not she wanted him to do it for her.
Yeah, it's almost like a passive aggressive.
Exactly.
I'm the modern woman, but actually in reality, they won't respect you. So let me do it for you, and you get the same results.
Yeah. So they haven't got the sort of like the nude in the office above their head like they used to in the sort of 70s and 80s. And yet there is still a different but comparable level of, are you really up to the job, love, because you're in a male sector?
That just enrages me a little bit, and I have to be honest, like sometimes it's so shocking. And I think and I shouldn't be shocked because I'm a therapist and I hear a lot of challenges and difficult questions. But I think as a woman, and being somebody who's pro women and wanting to see so much in equality, but also in open discussions, that this is why we want to do this episode, was to ask the question, get people's perspectives. And I really felt like it was going to be a different perspective. And actually just hearing that goes, I can't believe we're still entrenched in this, because it goes back to a little bit of what we did in our another episode when we talked about how do we inspire the next generation.
Yeah.
And all that research about the gap between equality in women and leaders, for example. And I remember being so shocked of how many years it's going to be. And this brings it all back again to think it's almost, we don't want to be swiping all businesses or areas that have a very high male rates of employees, when actually when we ask the question, these are the answers that they get. And it happens to be in a very male dominating, potentially, I can understand why they didn't want to share. It's discreet enough, but also very obvious how that sector's working.
Yeah.
That actually it's the disrespect, the passive aggressive undertones that hasn't culturally shifted. So yes, the HR and the corporate language has changed and the behaviours have changed. I'm not going to be inappropriate, but I'm going to undermine you, or I'm going to say comments that as your authority is going to undermine that. And that's what frustrates me, I think.
Yeah. And this was a woman leader who understandably is advocating for all types of equality, and in that sector is finding
outdated thinking
about gender.
Also, I suppose in terms of roles, in this particular one, it's in a very manufacturing sector, so it's still old classic boys club.
Yeah.
Even if it's modern thinking, it's still a boys club. So there's no one there to challenge. There's nobody else to put them right. And as poor individuals experiences, this is the biggest challenge, is the fact that how can it shift? There's an episode in itself. I think every time we do something, go have an episode. I think in terms of don't worry about bias, but I think around the male dominated industries and why are they shrinking with the female representatives? And this is one of the reasons, I think, because we can change the HR policy and the language all you want, but unless the employees have self-awareness and they have somebody putting them to rights to go, that's not the way you think. Why are you thinking that way? Being curious about, where did you get that from? Is that because you're trying to fit in, or is that actually your belief? And do you understand how entrenched that belief can actually go out into your behaviours and how you interact with the world? That's dangerous behaviour. And that doesn't help our generation at all. So, yeah.
Referring back to, I think it was the episode before last that we did on changing the gender leadership gap and how many generations it will take. In this particular sector, changing the equity mindset is likely to take many more generations. It's surprising and yet not surprising that it's still going on. It's more subtle than it used to be. And there's an element of disappointment that it's going to take a while before it's no longer the somewhat subtle but still present thinking. What was your third one?
The last one that we picked out was in the public sector, which covers a lot, but there's something around that sector. It came out in a few comments and stories, but I picked this particular one because it's around keeping your femininity and being true to who you are as a person, as a woman, while still working, what we just talked about, in a male dominated environment, which is challenging in itself. The massive question about women in leadership and how they present themselves to be elevated in that status. It shouldn't be, look at that strong woman in that workplace or in that leadership position. All women are strong by just being them and happen to be in a workplace, which I thought,
that's brilliant. That's really good.
But actually, they continued to talk about, they thought that we'd moved into a more equal space for women, but actually still fighting years. And I'll try and pronounce it, patriarchal thinking.
Patriarchal, yeah.
So even if it's in the public sector, the corporate world, it may feel like it will seen as more equal, but actually it isn't. And I think that's just the summary, isn't it? kind of look at that strong woman in the workplace. Isn't that great? You know, we've got
Yeah.
CEOs. It's so passive aggressive, but
Haven't you done well?
actually a lot of them, it's almost going back. All these roles demand a lot more of us, and actually, as women, we play all these different roles, which we have to live up to, which men do not. And I think that was another point that they've spoken about is that women, whatever sector, and this one's obviously very specific to the public sector, is that we play so many roles in our lives and demand so much of us to be present. How do we do that when actually men don't have to live up to the same expectations in order to get recognition?
Mm.
Well, that that may have so much in it, but also really, also it's just belting me to go, oh, again, another challenge, a huge challenge around not having women as a team exercise is to go, oh, that's my quota, we've got some women in leadership, but actually being able to do it because they're great at their job, not because we're trying to do that or not, what's the word, not patronize, but that perspective of, oh, you know, aren't they amazing because they happen to make it? Like,
as you know, I am a fan of a Venn diagram. What's really interesting is that we've got 3 responses from 3 different sectors, and yet there are overlaps in the responses themselves around how women are perceived, how women are having to play multiple roles in their work, how there is more equality, but still a very, very long way to go. And also how still we do have quite a patriarchal society. And then overlaid on all of those are the common themes of previous episodes about the fact that women potentially need to prove themselves more compared to men for their own sake and their own confidence. There's another theme with how women are perceived by other men, even in enlightened times. And also, women are playing multiple lives in their day-to-day lives, so that they are frequently being measured and assessed.
but I also think that's something to do with us as well. I think there's an element of we do it to ourselves because we've talked about it a lot around the culture we've been brought up in, or the fact that this is it, this is what we see and experience and embody in terms of our own experiences, and therefore we act out and play that way. And then, but also we are guilty of not being as empowering to other women.
Yeah.
Despite all we follow the norm without knowing actually we are not supporting our other colleagues at times.
Yeah.
Which then actually can contribute to the culture of, you know, we talked about likability, for example, when they're being, you know, affirming or they're being bitchy or they're doing it off because that and we feed into it.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be careful in ourselves to part of it similar to the other one with the beauty sector is we all have a play not played part to play in assessing our own attitudes. Because there is that thing about prejudice. Absolutely, there seems to be saying around sexism and perceptions and bias in there. But instead of just another branding, another theme, another name, is how do we have conversation with our loved ones who are male and get their perspective and try and change their narrative and explore why they think that way? Because actually, we, like you said at the beginning, we have some amazing snippets and stories of male colleagues or partners who are very supportive in their careers and do a lot of child care and support, managers who value. Actually, unfortunately, we had so many of the similar themes, which is why we picked out these particularly because I had 3 completely different sectors with the same theme.
We often talk off podcast about whether or not our podcast comes across as anti-men and male bashing. I don't believe it does. And we have those discussions to constantly check whether or not we are either creating or perpetuating an anti-male stance. We're very intentional about recognizing and talking about positive male role models and advocates, and reminding ourselves and others of how important inspirational men are in terms of raising, strong women, single men raising strong daughters, and demonstrating and encouraging good leadership behaviors in their daughters, in their sisters, in their partners. But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact there's still a long way to go to have the normalization of women in leadership not being labeled as women in leadership, but simply being leaders.
I think it's part of the other bit as you were talking when I was rereading that story that came in. And again, this is why it's fascinating, but also sad. We talk a lot about different roles, especially in leadership, as you go up the hierarchy, that a lot of these are created and shaped by men, previously generations.
Yeah.
Women step into them, they have to feel that they have to fit this masculine gingerbread mold. Whereas what this is talking about is how do we even celebrate our femininity within that?
Yes.
He'll be a leader who can lead, still embracing all that we are authentically, which I think is a great point. So how do you change that without being seen as strong? Or is that great that they're in that strong leadership position? Why can't we celebrate authenticity as authenticity, regardless of sex, regardless of role? It's just with human beings who have to be recognised that actually women have a lot going on, but still can go to a high standard. And I think there is a lot of, we have to acknowledge, even if we can't put our mind very much into the head of the sand, but unfortunately, what our listeners are telling us, there is their experiences, which is not about us having a biased man bashing, but this is what people's experiences, which is what's valuable, is saying a story which is both concerning and sad to me, but also thought provoking. To say these are people's perspectives. So how can we change that? How can we help people to think differently?
How would we further summarize? Because I think you've done a really great summary of the questions that have come in and the discussion that we've had around that. What would be our sort of leading takeaways, do we think, from these questions and this discussions? I know, good question.
It's being, again, it's about, we talk about being bold. So being very bold in pointing things out. To say, for example, for that example you gave, if I got the boss saying, would you want me to do it? Why would you say that?
Yeah.
It's about, was there something in that you don't think I'm capable of? Just that question, or like challenge the questions or the undermine. The unfortunate thing is within the school sector or within the education sector, there isn't that teaching yet around how to, what's the word, how to recognise these subliminal messages. So the word
Subliminal.
messages that come out, and how do you handle that?
Yeah.
Not education yet. So being educated, being able to challenge, ask the question, oh, what do you mean by that? Or is that because I'm a woman? Being very direct. I think sometimes if you're not direct, you can't. And, be direct about what you want. So are you asking a question because you want to know the answer? Are you pointing it out because you want them to realise what the behaviour is like?
There's a great quote, Robert Greenleaf, the guy who created servant leadership. And one of the things that he said was, tell me the truth with compassion. So I agree, it's absolutely imperative to challenge, but tapping into our desire to people please is that the way that we challenge doesn't have to be challenging. It can be compassionate. Yeah.
That's the approach they take.
Yeah.
It's about being okay with not allowing it to lie, I think. So
yeah. So we've got educating ourselves and others, praising positive behaviors when we see them, challenging with compassion. And also, it's turned into a little bit of a cliche now, but you can't be what you can't see. But fundamentally, it's incumbent on us to try to be, rather than to have other people be, to then feel that it's legitimate for us to be. So it goes back, I guess, full circle to being brave. We have to be brave enough to be, because other people can't be for you. So you need to be brave. You need to educate yourself. You need to educate others. You need to praise positive behavior. You need to challenge with compassion. You need to be active, but you can be those things authentically.
I'd agree, but I'd also disagree to the point where it's things I've said before. It's frustrating, and I can hear myself thinking this, where it's back to us again. We have to do the work, because it's like, this is the problem. This is the cultural shift, and it goes back to us to then have to fix it. I'm not disagreeing. I just feel like it's my own frustration. But although these are absolutely true, we have to be authentic to go, it shouldn't be happening. And I just want to kind of voice. I want to thank everybody who's kind of shared their stories. I would value them and we sit with them. I think we've got so much more to share about it. And that's why I wanted to just share those particular stories. But my heart hide my frustration that we have to be the ones doing it, although we can't do it alone. And I think that, just collectively being able to say we've had enough of this, we need to shift the needle, but it still makes me really sad. And so I think it's my thing to the listeners would be that I really value you. I see you. I thank you for your honesty. I hope to see my generation and ours, when we do these podcasts, we can celebrate. Oh my goodness, this has been shifting in their sector recently. This is a massive shift. I don't know. I'd like to see if we did this again in another couple of years' time, it would have different stories that we would share.
Well, the other thing that made me think about, and I think it was a good catch, to counter your counter to me, I thought about the Spike Milligan poem, where he said, "Smiling is infectious, you catch it like the flu. When someone smiled at me today, I started smiling too. I passed it round the corner and someone saw my grin. When he smiled, I realised I'd passed it on to him. I thought about that smile, then realised its worth. A single smile just like mine could travel round the earth. So if you feel a smile begin, don't leave it undetected. Let's start an epidemic quick and get the world infected." Now, while that is all about smiling and is just such a fun poem, I just love it. It goes back to your point about why does it start with us? And all of those behaviours that we've summarised can be infectious. You can catch those behaviours like the flu. You can pass them round the corner. You can then realise their worth because you see other people doing it as well. So I just thought of that.
That's good. And I'd love to see and hear, maybe we're doing a similar one later down the line and see what else.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for our listeners. I think it's been a good discussion point. Thank you, Pepsi, for allowing me to ask those questions and have a discussion. And let's hope that we see this shift the needle in a different way next time we talk about it. So
Soundstripe.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed, please download the podcast on any of your platforms that you listen on. Share, like, and follow so others can enjoy. Until next time, keep your heels high and your standards higher.